Today we honor Edward Stevenson and his families, Part 5, from 1845 to 1897. On the 7th of April, 1845, Edward Stevenson and Nancy Rita Porter were married at conference time in Nauvoo, Illinois, by Charles C. Rich, and on the next day they received their patriarchal blessings given by Patriarch John Smith. Edward and Nancy Stevenson received their endowments in the Nauvoo Temple on February 2, 1846, just before leaving for the West with the Saints.
In 1846, I was at Omaha, Nebraska, when nothing but Indians existed, and I was attacked by two who wished to rob me, but being resolute, they passed on. Edward and Nancy Stevenson lived at Montrose, Iowa after their marriage and traveled to winter quarters with his sister Mary Stevenson Clark. In June 1846, they started west with one wagon drawn by 3 yoke of cattle, also one cow that was giving milk. Apostle Amasa M. Lyman was captain. They also had a coop of 4 hens and 1 rooster attached to the back of the wagon box. The chickens were turned loose each evening for exercise. July 15, 1846, they crossed the Missouri River on the ferry boat at Council Bluffs and camped about 3/4 of a mile south of the ferry in winter quarters, which is now Florence, Nebraska, then Indian Territory. Ezra T. Clark soon built a log house with logs obtained in Missouri. Their house was about 4 rods west of the riverbank. Uncle Edward Stevenson camped by us and built his house only a few yards west of ours. A brief history of the crossing of the plains is given in the church emigration records. Edward Stevenson was the captain of the 3rd 10 in the artillery company led by General Charles C. Rich. Monday, June 21, 1847, Charles C. Rich writes from the camp at the Elkhorn River. At sunrise, we fired the 6-pounder, and about 9 o'clock we started. About 4 o'clock, we reached the main camp on the Platte River. A meeting was called. Elder John Taylor remarked that every man should put his gun in order and thus be ready for duty when called upon at a moment's warning. He also said that every head of a family should call together his family morning and evening to attend to family duties and invoke the blessing of God upon the camp, the cattle, and upon all that pertained to the whole camp of Israel. Wednesday, June 23, 1847. The emigrating companies took up their line of march at 9 o'clock a.m., traveling 2 teams abreast, the cannon heading one line and the skiff and temple bell the other. Saturday, June 26th, Captain Rich writes, we traveled about 18 miles, made a bridge across Looking Glass Creek. Monday, June 28th, after Brother Taylor's company had gone about 2 miles, McElroy sent us word that there was a war party of Indians lurking about. We fired the cannon twice and traveled 6 miles. Tuesday, July 13th, Captain Rich writes, traveled 15 miles. About the middle of the afternoon, we got news that there was a large herd of buffalo near. I killed 3 large bulls about 8 miles from camp. They would average about 1,000 pounds apiece. Saturday, August 7th, Captain Rich's company crossed the North Fork of the Platte River at noon, traveled up the west bank of that river 4 miles, and camped. Wednesday, August 18th, the company traveled 21 miles and camped at the mouth of Deer Creek. Thursday, August 26th, 4 oxen died and several of the cattle were sick. At this point, Brother Rich left the 2 boats, tore up 1 wagon, and took the irons. Thursday, September 2nd, the company traveled 10 miles, met the returning pioneers and battalion boys on their way to winter quarters. about 7 miles east of Cold Springs. Thursday, September 16th, the company traveled 8 miles and camped at Fort Bridger. Tuesday, September 21st, Captain Rich's company traveled 8 miles and stopped for the night at the head of Echo Canyon. September 26th, Captain Rich's company traveled 10 miles, crossing the mountains to East Canyon Creek. Charles C. Rich, 9th Company, arrived in the old fort at Salt Lake City October 2nd, 1847.
At a special conference held in Salt Lake City August 28, 1852, Edward was called to take a mission to Gibraltar in the company of Nathan Tanner Porter. It was at this conference that the revelation on celestial marriage was first made public. Edward and Nathan left for Gibraltar September 16, 1852.
In crossing over Little Mountain, our carriage was broken down, and we left our baggage there, covered up with a buffalo robe, while we returned to the city to have the vehicle repaired. The next day we arrived at our camp outfit on Little Mountain just in time to save it from a band of roving Indians. That night we camped all alone on Big Mountain, and were disturbed in our slumber by the howling of wolves. On the 1st of October we arrived at the Missouri River in the best of health and spirits. Our evenings on the journey had been spent around the campfire discussing religious subjects, and often being instructed by Apostle Orson Pratt. On November 11th, 21 of us who had engaged passage to Liverpool on a sailing vessel set sail, and arrived at our destination on January 5th, 1853. After visiting President Samuel W. Richards at Liverpool and my relatives in Leicester, London, Southampton, and the Isle of Wight, myself and companion took passage from Southampton on February 28, 1853. On the morning of March 8, 1853, we were anchored under Gibraltar and heard the morning gun fired as the signal for opening the gates of the fortress, raising the drawbridges, lowering rope ladders, and opening up the garrison generally. The picturesqueness of the rock and garrison from the waters of the bay, especially when illuminated on a dark night, was a grand scene. Small craft soon placed us and our luggage on the rock. While passing along the narrow streets and sidewalks, only paved with cobblestone, but scrupulously clean, and on seeing so many people of different nationalities, there being 12 different languages spoken, it produced peculiar emotions best known to those who feel the worth of souls. It truly made us feel to put our trust in the Lord. After getting something to eat, we walked up to the summit of the rock and erected an altar of loose stones and dedicated ourselves and the mission unto the Lord, and we were comforted. The scenery from this spot was sublime. On the Sabbath, we visited the Methodist Church and were introduced to Reverend Mr. George Alton. My father helped to build this chapel, and myself and 2 sisters and a brother were baptized therein. We were informed that a permit from the governor was necessary before either an indoor or outdoor meeting was held. The magistrate informed us, "You will be allowed, as native-born, to remain on the rock, but if caught preaching, will be made a prisoner immediately. And you, Mr. Porter, by this permit, will be allowed to remain 15 days. Your permit will not be renewed." On the 23rd of January, 1854, I had the pleasure of organizing a branch of the church consisting of 10 members, ordaining 1 elder and 1 priest.
Edward Stevenson was released from his mission to go to Utah, effective January 1st, 1855. Edward was a captain of 2 emigrating companies which arrived in Salt Lake City September 11th, 1855. In June of 1857, Edward became the junior president of the 30th Quorum of 70s. In 1858, Edward was called on a mission to the United States, this being his fourth trip across the plains. On the return journey, he was placed in charge of another company of emigrating saints. They arrived at Salt Lake City September 16, 1859. On December 14, 1866, Edward was called as a home missionary to preach mainly in the wards of Salt Lake and Davis counties. Edward was called on his third mission at General Conference October 7, 1869, to serve in the Eastern States. On February 11, 1870, after leaving the Eastern States, Edward visited the Kirtland Temple and there met Martin Harris.
After my arrival in Utah in 1870, I was inspired to write to Martin Harris and soon received a reply that the Spirit of God for the first time prompted him to go to Utah. President Brigham Young requested me to get up a subscription and emigrate Martin to Utah, he subscribing $25 for that purpose. Having raised the subscription to about $200, on the 19th of July, 1870, I took the railroad cars for Ohio, and on the 10th of August filled my appointment, preaching twice in the Kirtland Temple, finding Martin Harris elated with his prospective journey. On the 21st of August, Martin was with me in Chicago, and at the American Hotel bore testimony to a large number of people of the visitation of the angel, etc. At Des Moines, Iowa, on August 26th, Edward took Martin Harris to see the editor of the Iowa State Register, who reported in the August 28th edition that, among other things, Martin estimated the weight of the gold plates to be between 40 and 60 pounds. Edward and Martin arrived at Ogden, Utah, August 29th, and was rebaptized by Edward Stevenson in the Endowment House September 17, 1870. Martin and his sister were also baptized by Edward Stevenson for a number of their deceased relatives. The confirmations were performed by Orson Pratt, Joseph F. Smith, John Taylor, Wilford Woodruff, and George A. Smith.
Edward was set apart for his fourth mission, April 28, 1872, a special mission in the United States. Most of his missionary service was in Iowa and Illinois. He arrived home September 14, 1872. Edward was set apart for his fifth mission, December 12, 1877, a mission to the southern states. This was his 14th trip across the plains, 5 times by team and 9 by train. Most of his missionary service was in the state of Tennessee. He held 177 public meetings before his return September 23, 1878. Edward was called June 7, 1879, to be an alternate member of the First Council of 70s and continued to serve as a home missionary. On October 8, 1883, Edward was set apart for his sixth mission, a mission to Canada, mainly in the province of Ontario. He then went to England and the Isle of Jersey, where he obtained genealogies of about 400 relatives, published 4,000 pamphlets in Canada and England, and bore testimony to thousands, both publicly and privately. He left Liverpool August 30th with a company of 497, and arrived in Salt Lake City September 16, 1884. Edward was set apart for his seventh mission, February 1, 1886, to the United States and Great Britain. In the Deseret Evening News of December 10, 1886, notice is given that deputy marshals searched the home of Edward Stevenson. He was wanted on a charge of unlawful cohabitation, polygamy, made against him December 10, 1886.
Edward comments, "I think I have something else better to do than to spend my time in the pen." Edward and his wife, Elizabeth Jane Dufresne, left Liverpool, England, November 13, 1886, after having gathered genealogies of about 5,000 names. Edward writes, I trust and feel that my mission will prove a blessing to many, both living and dead. Anti-Polygamy Days. Edward Stevenson in hiding. Mrs. Elizabeth Jane Stevenson took me in a very nice buggy to Cousin Carter's in Bountiful, Davis County. They did not know me in my disguise. I slept at Sister Mary Carter's. We remained, copying genealogies, several days. In disguise, I walked up to the 70s council meeting at President H.S. Eldridge's residence, just past the City Hall. I rang the bell and was admitted. My voice was known, and a general handshaking and greeting resulted. After business, I was called upon to speak and report my mission of 16,816 miles in about 10 months. Edward served his 8th mission in 1887 with his wife, Emily Electa Williams, in Ohio and England. In his journal under date of November 7, 1887, he writes, "Once more I arrive at home, and yet I have no home, but I am an exile. I passed through the back lot to Judge Elias Smith and visited with him. He congratulated me on my successful mission and in obtaining about 12,000 names of my dead relatives. I have traveled 34,925 miles, held many public meetings and lectures, and have written 536 letters, private and public, many for the public press, and spent $1,241.50.
Edward was set apart September 4th, 1888, for his 9th mission. Apostle Franklin D. Richards, in the blessing, said, "We bless you to go upon this journey, which is contemplated to be taken with Brother Jensen in order to find and obtain such valuable information as is necessary for church history, and for bringing forward and perfecting the facts and knowledge and information of historical value, which shall be of great value to the people of God in the days which are to come." At Independence, Missouri, Edward spoke 20 minutes at the Josephite testimony meeting on the Temple Block. They visited David Whitmer, Jr., and examined the printer's copy of the Book of Mormon. They visited the Martin Harris Farm, and at Palmyra visited with Major John Gilbert, who set the type for the Book of Mormon. They visited the Kirtland Temple and found Edward's name in the old temple book under date of February 11, 1870, when he visited with Martin Harris about coming to Utah. At Nauvoo, Illinois, they copied 3 affidavits relating to Joseph Smith practicing plural marriage at that time. At Montrose, Iowa, Edward visited the place where he fished 50 years ago, and 3 or 4 miles out, where he and Nancy Arita Porter were married and spent their honeymoon. They arrived back at Salt Lake City October 15, 1888. On May 8, 1892, at Chihuahua, Mexico, Edward concluded a trade for 100,000 acres of land, 90 miles southwest of Chihuahua, for a ranch and colony of an organized company.
In a letter to the Deseret News dated October 16, 1893, Edward writes, "I spent a happy Sunday in the center stake of Zion yesterday. I have been treated with becoming respect by both the Hedrachites and Josephites. Meeting houses of both have been opened to me. I gave an illustrated lecture to the reorganized Sunday school on Sunday and was invited to preach in the Hedrachite meeting house on the Temple Block. At Adam-ondi Ammon, I have taken several views of the altar, including the old house, as well as the valley and the old stable where I slept on a bed of corn cobs." In a letter to the Deseret News dated November 11, 1893, Edward writes, "After the closing of the World's Fair at Chicago and visiting relatives at Sandusky, Ohio, I have availed myself of the favorable opportunity of visiting the land of my youthful days, Pontiac, Michigan, and the grave of my father. 2.5 miles out from Pontiac, I came to a schoolhouse where I went to school. and where the prophet Joseph Smith preached the first Mormon sermon. After taking a few pictures of our old home, the lake where I was baptized, sleeping one night on the old farm, I retired to a secret spot, poured out my soul in thanksgiving, dropped a tear, not of regret for the steps taken, but joy for the knowledge received by the gospel, feeling that my hopes in the West more than repaid me for the sacrifice I had made. Edward Stevenson was called as a general authority in the Salt Lake Tabernacle Sunday, October 7, 1894, the seventh president of the First Council of 70. He was set apart October 8th in the Assembly Hall. Edward was set apart June 3, 1896, to fill his 10th mission, a mission in Montana and Idaho. It was while on this mission that Edward became ill at Walla Walla, Washington, September 11th. This was the forerunner of his fatal illness, which began in December and ended January 27, 1897, when he passed away at his home in Salt Lake City. At the funeral service held in the Tabernacle January 31, 1897, it was said, "The Latter-day Saints knew where to find Edward Stevenson, and when the people heard him speak, they knew by what spirit he spoke, and that his words would be an inspiration and a testimony and a continued witness of the divine truth of the mission of the prophet Joseph Smith, of the organization of the holy priesthood to which he belonged, and of the ultimate gathering of Israel and the building up and establishment of the kingdom of our Father in this latter-day dispensation. As a missionary in the field, he has preached probably as many sermons and done as much in speaking as any member of the church. President Wilford Woodruff said, "I read a pamphlet yesterday that he published about 3 years ago and called Reminiscences of the Prophet Joseph Smith and Testimony of the Book of Mormon. There is as great a testimony in that little pamphlet concerning the truth of Mormonism, the gospel of Christ, the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, and the work of the Lord in the last days than in any document I have ever seen outside of the Doctrine and Covenants and Book of Mormon."
Edward Stevenson was married April 7, 1845, at Nauvoo, Hancock County, Illinois, to Nancy Rita Porter. She bore him 5 children, 3 sons and 2 daughters, as follows.
Nephi Porter Stevenson was born July 15, 1846, at Council Bluffs, Pottawatomie County, Iowa, and was married December 16, 1865, in the Salt Lake Endowment House to Louisa Stewart. She bore him 8 children. She died March 7, 1891, age 45, at Fielding, Box Elder County, Utah, and was buried March 10th in the Farmington City Cemetery, Davis County, Utah. He died July 12, 1918, age 71, at Kirk's Hot Springs, Bannock County, Idaho, and was buried July 15th at Chalice, Custer County, Idaho.
Eliza Stevenson was born April 16, 1848, at Salt Lake City, and was married December 16, 1865, at the Salt Lake Endowment House to John Riley Stewart. She bore him 10 children. He died December 21, 1916, age 76, at Ogden, Weber County, Utah, and was buried December 23rd in the Ogden City Cemetery. She died March 30th, 1934, age 85, at Montpelier, Bear Lake County, Idaho, and was buried April 2nd at the Montpelier Cemetery.
Edward Alonzo Stevenson was born March 28, 1850, at Salt Lake City, and was married October 24, 1870, in the Endowment House to Emmeline Stewart. She bore him 9 children. Emmeline died February 24, 1888, aged 36, at Curlew, Cassia County, Idaho. He was married August 20, 1896, at Enterprise, Wallowa County, Oregon, to Phoebe Elizabeth Brackenbury. She bore him 12 children. He died January 28, 1938, age 87, at Portland, Multnomah County, Oregon, and was buried January 30th in the Portland City Cemetery.
Nancy Elizabeth Stevenson was born July 22, 1852, at Salt Lake City, and died May 5, 1853, age 1. She was buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery.
Joseph Echo Porter Stevenson was born October 1, 1857, at Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, Utah, and was married and sealed December 8, 1881, in the Salt Lake Endowment House to Mary Alice Richards. She bore him 7 children. She died February 13, 1926, age 62, at Riverton, Salt Lake County, Utah, and was buried February 16th in the Farmington City Cemetery. Joseph Echo was married May 19, 1927, at Salt Lake City to Sarah Grace Dolan. There were no children by this marriage. Sarah died December 1, 1933, age 66, at Utica, Crawford County, Wisconsin, and was buried December 4th. Joseph Echo died June 23, 1929, age 71, at Santa Cruz County, California, and was buried June 27th in the Oakwood Cemetery at Santa Cruz.
Edward's second wife was Nancy's sister, Sarah Porter, sealed September 6, 1852, at Salt Lake City. They had no children. Edward's third wife was Elizabeth Jane Dufresne. They were married and sealed October 28, 1855, at Salt Lake City in the President's office. She bore him 8 children, 6 sons and 2 daughters, as follows. Elizabeth Jane Dufresne Stevenson was born March 18, 1857, at Salt Lake City, and was married and sealed December 15, 1884, at the Endowment House to Charles Frederick Wilcox. She bore him 6 children. He died October 21, 1931, at age 72, at Salt Lake City, and was buried October 25th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Elizabeth Jane died January 22, 1947, age 89, at Salt Lake City, and was buried January 25th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Mary Arita Stevenson was born 7 July, 1860, at Salt Lake City, and died age 3, July 4th, 1864.
James Edward Stevenson was born 29 April 1862 at Salt Lake City and died age 1 October 2, 1863. Ezra Thompson Dufresne Stevenson was born October 29, 1864 at Salt Lake City and was married and sealed in the Salt Lake Temple June 22, 1893 to Mary Amelia Burton. She bore him 1 child. Mary Amelia died 27 July 1897, age 30, at Salt Lake City. Ezra was married and sealed July 18, 1901 in the Salt Lake Temple to Rhoda Richards. She bore him 6 children. Rhoda died November 3, 1956, age 78, at Salt Lake City, and was buried November 6 in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Ezra died July 17, 1952, age 87, at Salt Lake City, and was buried July 19 in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. George Franklin Stevenson was born 18 April 1867 at Salt Lake City and died age 1 September 2, 1868. Samuel Wilford Stevenson was born 16 April 1869 at Salt Lake City and died May 3, 1869. Brigham Young Stevenson was born 18 March 1876 at Salt Lake City and died the next day, March 19, 1876. Moroni Charles Stevenson was born December 17, 1877 at Salt Lake City and died age 21, June 29, 1899, and is buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery.
Edward's fourth wife was Emily Electa Williams. They were married and sealed April 20th, 1857, at Salt Lake City in the President's office. She bore him 11 children, 8 sons and 3 daughters, as follows. Electa Melvina Stevenson was born January 23, 1858 at Salt Lake City. She was married October 26, 1874 in the Salt Lake Endowment House to George Manwaring. She bore him 7 children. George Manwaring died July 7, 1889, age 35 at Salt Lake City, and was buried July 9 in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. She was married October 19, 1891 at Salt Lake City to John Johnson. She bore him 1 child. She was married November 5, 1903 at Otis, Idaho to Frederick Steiner. Electa died May 27, 1949, age 87 at Salt Lake City, and was buried May 29th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery.
Henry Randall Stevenson was born August 31, 1860 at Salt Lake City. He was married April 21, 1886 in the Logan Temple to Hannah Rowena Buckwalter. She bore him 11 children. She died December 16, 1943, age 81 at Cottonwood, Salt Lake County, and was buried December 20th in the Salt Lake Wasatch Lawn Cemetery. He died March 24, 1942, age 81 at Cottonwood, and was buried March 26th in the Wasatch Lawn Cemetery. William Orlando Stevenson was born January 18, 1863 at Salt Lake City. He died November 5, 1865, age 2 at Salt Lake City, and is buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery.
Emily Rosella Stevenson was born March 31, 1865 at Salt Lake City. She was married and sealed March 4, 1885 in the Endowment House in Salt Lake City to Francis McDonald. She bore him 11 children. He died December 2, 1920, age 69 at Holiday, and was buried December 5th at the Holiday Cemetery. Emily died April 26, 1946, age 81 at Holiday, and was buried April 30th at the Holiday City Cemetery.
Daniel William Stevenson was born May 29, 1867 at Salt Lake City. He died September 26, 1868, age 1 at Salt Lake City, and is buried at the Salt Lake City Cemetery. John Wells Stevenson was born October 29, 1869 at Salt Lake City. He was married June 23, 1897 in the Salt Lake Temple to Sarah Ann Perry. She bore him 8 children. She died December 15, 1967, age 94 at Salt Lake City, and was buried December 19th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. He died April 26, 1954, age 84 at Salt Lake City, and was buried April 30th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Eugene Edward Stevenson was born September 16, 1872 at Salt Lake City, and was married December 18, 1903 in the Salt Lake Temple to Loretta Ellen Staples. She bore him 6 children. She died December 4, 1961, age 78 at Holiday, and was buried in the Wasatch Lawn Cemetery. He died August 26, 1943, age 70 at Holiday, Salt Lake County, and was buried August 30th in the Wasatch Lawn Cemetery. Lester Alanson Stevenson was born August 10, 1874 at Salt Lake City, and was married December 17, 1902 in the Salt Lake Temple to Bertha Esther Starley. She bore him 9 children. She died October 17, 1957, age 74, at Salt Lake City, and was buried October 19th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. He died August 10, 1961, age 87, at Salt Lake City, and was buried August 12th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Hiram Smith Stevenson was born August 28, 1876 at Big Cottonwood, Salt Lake County, Utah, and was married September 6, 1905 in the Salt Lake Temple to Mary Piety Slaughter. She bore him 8 children. She died March 17, 1975 at Salt Lake City and was buried March 30th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. He died January 12, 1951, age 74, at Salt Lake City and was buried January 15th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Ernest Extra Stevenson was born August 26, 1876 at Big Cottonwood, Salt Lake County, Utah, and was married March 17, 1900, in the Salt Lake Temple to Emma Walker. She bore him 5 children. She died May 17, 1914, aged 34, at Salt Lake City, and was buried May 20th in the Murray City Cemetery. He married November 17, 1915, Annette Blanche Gunderson in the Salt Lake Temple. She bore him 4 children. She died July 29, 1961, age 70, at Ashton, Fremont County, Idaho, and was buried August 2nd in the Murray City Cemetery. He died June 5, 1956, age 77, in Los Angeles County, California, and was buried June 12th in the Murray City Cemetery.
Harriet Louisa Stevenson was born November 21, 1880, at Big Cottonwood, Salt Lake County, Utah, and was married September 11, 1901, in the Salt Lake Temple to Franklin Walker. She bore him 11 children. He died January 13, 1973, age 94, at Letha Gem County, Idaho, and was buried at Meridian, Ada County, Idaho. She died July 16, 1956, age 75, at Caldwell Canyon County, Idaho, and was buried July 19th at Meridian, Ada County, Idaho. Edward's 5th wife was Mary Ann Dufresne, a sister to Edward's 3rd wife. They were married and sealed January 11, 1871, at the Salt Lake City in the Endowment House. They had no children. Edward's 6th wife was Elizabeth Ramon. They were married and sealed January 11, 1871, in the Endowment House. They had no children. Edward's 7th wife was Louisa Yates. They were married and sealed December 16, 1872, in the Endowment House. She bore him 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter, as follows.
Edward Isaac Yates Stevenson was born May 16, 1874, at Salt Lake City, and died February 17, 1876, at Salt Lake City, and is buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery.
Louisa Hannah Yates Stevenson was born May 8, 1876, at Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, Utah, and died November 23, 1877, at Salt Lake City, and is buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery.
Thomas William Yates Stevenson was born April 12, 1878, at Scipio, Millard County, Utah, and was married January 10, 1900, in the Salt Lake Temple to Anna Louise Hedquist. They had no children. She died August 21, 1900, age 23, at Forest Dale, Salt Lake County, and was buried August 24. Thomas William Yates Stevenson was married June 22, 1903, to Elnora Comfort McKay. They were sealed 8 September 1904 in the Salt Lake Temple. She bore him 4 children. Elnora died June 18, 1966, at Oakland, Alameda County, California. Thomas William Yates Stevenson was married April 12, 1945, to Gwen Silver. They had no children. Gwen died December 22, 1967, at Long Beach, Los Angeles County, California, and was buried January 3, 1968, in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Thomas William Yates Stevenson died March 16, 1967, at Long Beach, Los Angeles County, California, and was buried Tuesday, March 21, 1967, in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Edward's 8th wife was Louisa Yates' half-sister, Sarah Yates. They were sealed 31 January 1889 in the Manti Temple. Sarah was born 17 September 1812 at Claverton, Somersetshire, England. they had no children. Total known posterity of Edward Stevenson as of 7 August 1996. 27 children, 142 grandchildren, 804 great-grandchildren, 958 second great-grandchildren, for a total posterity of 1,931, with 752 total spouses of children, grandchildren, etc., making a total posterity of 2,683, including spouses.
As descendants of these fine and faithful people, let us remember their strong, wonderful qualities and try to live our lives to make them proud of us.